Hi guys, so for our second video, today we're going to look at also how to grade a free response question. Now, depending on what class size you have, grading for responses gets to be a little challenging. And then, of course, depending on your experience level as well. So if you have not taught AP for a while or for at all, then grading a free response question can be challenging. So that's something that we're going to be looking at right now. So I'm going to show you some examples of how I grade for responses, especially at the beginning of the year where it's very difficult to understand because kids do not know how to write in a science course. Kids are trained by English teachers, rightly so or not, it's up to you, to kind of embellish a little bit, to talk more, to make sure that they find different ways of viewing the point. In science writing, especially during an APES course with the time limits they have, it's not something you want them to do. You want them to get to the point, answer the question as quickly as possible. So in the next portion of this video, we're going to be spending some time looking at how to grade for responses, where you can go to get those grades, and so on. So that's what this next portion is about. So we'll go through it, starting now. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at free response questions. So as I mentioned, free response questions are something that kids need to have a lot of practice on. In previous exams, it's always where they do the worst. Now, it was very challenging this year because of COVID-19 and the fact that the entire exam was all free response. So some teachers were having trouble with their students because it's something they hadn't had a chance to practice as much. So one of the things we're going to look at is I want to be able to look at student samples and how you should be grading them and how you should get your kids involved in grading student samples or their own questions as well. So I'm here at the College Board site at AP Central. Now again, with AP Classroom, this is going to be a little different, but I do want to show you how this would work as a example in person, and then how you can actually do this digitally as well. So I'm going to show you how I would do the grading here on digital. So you got to go down to Sciences, and you're going to look for our course, Environmental Science. And one of the things you're going to see is that it's going to have all these updates on the course, the exam, and so on. We're going to look at the exam tab right here. So when you go into the exam, it's going to have really only the 2019 questions available, as well as the overview of what the test should look like next year, assuming there's no other issues. With the multiple choice section, that was what it was in the 2019, and here's the 2020 exam. 80 questions, hour and a half, 60%. And then free response, 3 questions, hour and 10 minutes, 40%. So that, hopefully, assuming 2021 is more normal of a year, will be what the exam will look like. Now, what we're going to be looking at is some previous questions from previous years. So they only have 2019 available because that question or that set of questions was designed a little bit more like what this year was supposed to look like. So, but we're going to look at a previous one because this is going to give us a chance to look at student samples for an experimental design question that was actually offered. So we're going to go all the way back to 2012. So you see right here, 2012 free response questions. In there, you're going to see the free response questions themselves, the guidelines, the performance, and then some sample responses and the distributions. Okay. So what we're going to be looking at is, and actually that's the same tab, let me close that, is 2012. So I just opened up a window for the scoring guidelines for 2012. Now, in 2012, question number 3 was an experimental design question. That before this year's change to the exam, that was the last time we had seen an experimental design question. So that was what I was working with students previously. This is one I would give my students at the beginning of the year just to look at the types of vocabulary required for experimental design, hypothesis, control, dependent variable, accepting or rejecting hypothesis, experimental results, things like that, right? And of course it does have, what all these questions always have is half of the information or the points are available from the experimental design portion, and then half is about, well, do you know about environmental science? In this case, it's agricultural practices, IPM, pesticides, and so on. So what we're going to be looking at are student samples from this year. So when you click on here, you'll see the scoring guidelines. That's what I have on this one. And then I have sample responses for question 2. Now, this is something that's provided for every exam from years past, and hopefully will be allowed as well with this year. We'll see how that goes, given the weird nature of this test. But so it begins with the scoring guidelines, but then actually I hit the wrong question. That's question 2. I should be looking for question 3. Um, and so question 3 samples. What you're looking at here is it'll start by giving you the guidelines again. So there's the answers to the test. And again, these are not going to be straightforward answers where it's just always this is the answer. Usually it tends to be something that has options as well. So, excuse me. So you'll see here, state the hypothesis. There are different ways they could state this correctly. Describe the method you would use to test your hypothesis, identify the control, and so on. Okay. So what I've done here is that's going to be the beginning. One of the things College Board does as well, there's going to be quite a bit of choices, but then they give you student samples. So what College Board does is when they give an exam in a normal year, they'll have a little checkbox that students can answer. And in that checkbox, that the question is simply, are you okay if College Board uses this for student samples, such as like this? Now, these are from students who did, and every year during the exam, they try to get an idea of what is a 10, what is a 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 for this. So you'll see at the beginning here, they tend to have the scoring guidelines, and then they have the sample questions. They give you all the different versions. Now, the great thing is towards the end, you can see what these were scored. So if we look at sample 3A, that student got a 10 out of 10. Sample 3B, that student got 8. 3C got 6. And then some years, they are more detailed. In the earlier years, 2012 and 2011, those, they may not be as detailed, but they do tell you where you can earn the points. So for new teachers, I highly recommend using this resource because it's always difficult. We always question ourselves. You know, if you're not an AP reader, you look at a question and you go, does that kind of count? I'm not sure. So, but if you can look at student samples and then read what counted of the same question you're using, that's a great thing. Now, that's why I still like this resource. Of course, AP Classroom is awesome because you can give the question, look at the rubric, and grade it online. But without seeing an actual sample of what that looked like, it becomes a challenge. So this is why I still like using these, and I recommend all new teachers try to give some of these older questions. Now, these older questions are also in College Board's AP Classroom. Later on, I'll show you how to find those. The great thing is AP Classroom added a search function, so it's very easy to find a question that was an old question on here and then can be used on AP Classroom. So that's the great part. But for now, I just want to show you how to grade these. And this is also going to be helpful, I think, if you're a teacher with many students. If you've got 4 sections and you're looking at 100 students or more, giving a free response question is daunting. You look at yourself and you go, do I have time to grade this? You know, do I want to grade this? Is this something I have time for? And then to still be teaching at the same time. So what I like to do is I give my students a question, and in the beginning of the year, I let them grade it for me. Okay. Now, what I like to do is you can choose to do this your own way. If you're big on not letting them grade themselves and you're actually going to count these 4 grades, then you can try to anonymize the papers by having them put just ID numbers or numbers and then shuffling them around. I'm good with that. I'm a big fan of letting them grade themselves so they can see what they did wrong. Here's why. Sometimes kids go on and on, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video. They're taught by English teachers to embellish, to give more detail. And that's something that works for English, but for APES, that doesn't work. So one of the things I like to do is have them highlight what parts of the question would earn points. Okay, so we're not going to look at sample A here because that's a 10. We're going to look at sample C. Sample C, I believe, was a 6. Okay, now you can do this on paper and print it out with a highlighter, and you may highlight where they get points. Okay, now what I'm going to show you today is how to do this with an app called Kami. Okay, so Kami allows you to open up a document, and I've already done that in this window. And it allows you to mark up and edit the document. So here, I actually don't think I'm logged in. So you don't need to have a login, but if you're using Chrome, you just look for the extension called Cami. That is a very easy one. And what you do is you can mark up the document. So I'm looking at the student samples as a document that I can now highlight. Okay, so I got to go all the way down to 3C. So there's the question. This is what it looked like for the student that year. And so I can now use the highlighter and highlight text. Okay, so if I just go from here to here, it should allow me to highlight. Okay, and that's going to allow it to save my work, but I don't need that. Okay, and so I'm using the box highlighter here on my tools. So if you go to markup, and then you go to box highlighter, because with the writing, it's not going to read it as text on Cami. So the easiest thing to do is I'm going to go ahead and highlight that green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these side by side. So I'm going to pull this window out, okay, off to the side here. And I'm also going to be looking at my guidelines on the left here. Okay, so we'll put them right there side by side so that I can look at them and see. Now, what I like to do for students is I will put this on the board, okay, up on my document camera, and they'll be able to see the rubric as we see. Okay, so I'm going to go down to question 2, scoring guidelines. Okay, or question 3. Sorry, I keep doing question 2. And down here, you're going to see that there's the guidelines. So we can look at it, and if you want to do this with your kids at the beginning with one of these sample student responses, that's definitely a great first step. That way they get the practice, and they don't feel so judged when they're highlighting their own work. They know kind of what to do beforehand. So if you look at it right here, the rubric reads, state the hypothesis, and then gives the possible chances. So for the student sample, it says, if the minnow is affected by the active ingredient, product X, then it will get sick or die. Okay. And so it must predict a relationship between X and the minnow health. It must indicate a specific direction of change for the variable. Okay. And it must also, the students may also state the null hypothesis where there's no relationship between the two. Okay. And so what you can do is go all the way down if you like to cheat, and I'm okay with that because it gets scary that first time. And they get 2 points were earned in part A, 1 point for correctly indicating the manipulation and 1 point for identifying the control. Okay. And so for part 1, they were not given a point, if I see correctly here. Make sure. I see now. So they were not given the point for part 1 because they did not specifically say the increase in the product of concentration or the change in exposure. They're just saying if it's affected. That's not really specific enough. Now they do earn points right here for saying I would put the same number of minnows into 4 different fish tanks. I would also put the same amount of water in each fish tank. Then I would keep the first fish tank free of all pesticides and vary the concentration of the pesticides in the remaining tanks. Concentration ranging from large to small amounts. I would then observe the effect of the pesticide on the fish at a predetermined amount for the same for all the tanks. Okay, and so if you look at it on the bottom to make sure, they earn the point for saying a manipulation of the independent variable and for identifying the control. So they identified the items they were not going to change. So what I would do for my students is I would show them this, and then using our highlighter, we would say, all right, well, this portion right here, I would put the same number of minnows in the 4 different fish tanks. That's something that would earn points. I would also put the same amount of water in each fish tank right there. Okay. And then I would also let them know that they keep the fish in each tank and then observe the effect on them for the predetermined amount. Okay. And so what kids do with this, and again, these are good answers. They always try to pick good ones where you try to highlight as much as possible. Once they start to see what's wrong with their work, I'll close that up. Students are going to find out, oh, I wrote way more than I needed to. Okay. And so this is always a great example of, oh, look, they highlight everything. Yeah, but that's not always the case with them. So let's look at a portion part B for describing the results, that 1 point was earned for describing the results and 1 point was earned for C. So let's go to B. Okay. And I do get that portion right there. Okay. And so in B, in all the tanks that had concentration of the pesticide that acted normally, it seemed like the fish in the first tank without any pesticides in it. Even in the fish tank that had the highest concentration of pesticide showed no effects. So they do get 1 point, as it says in the rubric here, for part B, for correct description of the experimental results. So they were able to do that. Now, for their highlighting portion, what are they going to highlight? Well, you'd have them say, well, it seemed like the fish in the fish tank, without any pesticides in it. Even in that one, they had concentrations that showed no effects. Okay, so they start to identify that what is being written up too much, and in the first couple of times they do this, they're going to see that there's huge gaps of non-highlighted portion, and then finally they earn the points. Okay, and so that's something that I would do with the kids at the beginning. You can do this with a sample like this, or you can have them do a question that you would like them to do, and then highlight themselves so they start to realize, oh, I'm writing way too much. I'm talking too much here. And think of all the time that they've lost by writing and embellishing and filling that stuff out. So student samples are a good way to do this. And again, so is their own writing. And it's up to you if you like to anonymize it. And it's great because what you can do later is then you can accept the work back. And now that they've highlighted where the points are, you can start to add the points up. And so in those first couple times, you can double check your kids' work and say, oh, well, they're highlighting way too much. They think too much of themselves. And then you cut back and you don't give them all the points. And it becomes a lot easier than just reading every single one over and over again. So that's a good way of getting things through without putting yourself through too much torture and work, especially because more free response practice is necessary for kids to be successful on the AP exam. The multiple choice is 60% of the test, but they'd have to have near perfect scores on that to get that 4 or 5 that they want if they don't do well on the free response. So the more exposure to this, the better. And again, this is going to help you identify their things. And if you want to use this on Cami with your kids, it's a free app. I got a couple of pop-ups saying I should sign in and try it out. But this is not going to charge me. And then again, if you want to download this, that's where you may have to sign in and go from there. So, and that's not a big deal. Okay. So if there's any questions on that, there'll be a discussion board post as well.